Time now. So nationalisation or renationalisation is one of those topics that kind of comes back periodically, doesn't it, Ben? Particularly when there are problems in industries and everyone's saying, what could be done?
Yeah, looking for alternatives, and the big question, would some of our big infrastructure projects, be it public utilities like water or electricity, or even things like the railways, be better run by the government? So that's the question. Yeah, morning to you. The pros and cons of bringing certain businesses back under state control, always discussed. But this week, well, it's resurfaced again for some pretty key reasons. Well, first up, there was that record fine, £126 million for Southern Water. That's because it leaked sewage and then covered up the problem for years. Critics say that's because of years of underinvestment by the private company. Well, then yesterday, the transport giant Stagecoach said it was not going to bid for any more rail franchises in the UK. It also runs some bus services. It's got a big stake in Virgin Trains, but it lost the East Coast franchise last year, and it's now been banned from bidding for 3 more, including the busy West Coast mainline, as well as East Midlands trains too. So let's discuss both sides of the debate. With me here in the studio is Ellen Lees from the campaign group We Own It. She is in favour of nationalisation. And from our London studio is Matthew Lesh, who's from the Adam Smith Institute. He is against. Very good morning to you both. Good morning. Adam, maybe I could start. I'm calling you Adam, from the Adam Smith Institute. Matthew, good morning to you. I want to start with you because we saw those 2 examples there this week, didn't we? Southern Water and, of course, Stagecoach. It proves, doesn't it, that big projects like that just don't work in private hands.
Well, look, I don't think that's true whatsoever. I think it's important to put privatisation in context. Before privatisation, you had to wait 3 months for a phone line. There was not irregular blackouts. There were burst water pipes and substantial leakage from the water system, and passenger numbers in trains were declining. Since privatisation, there has been huge investment in infrastructure that government just couldn't have done. If you take the case of water, there's been £160 billion of investment in water. That means that there's less leakage. It means the water quality, the drinking water we drink, has gone up. It means that more water is treated before it's put into the sea or rivers, and it means cleaner environments. And if you even just look at a comparison between England and Wales and Scotland, where Scotland water is nationalised, up in Scotland there is twice as much water leakage. If you compare to Northern Ireland, where, again, water is nationalised, there's persistent complaints about underinvestment. And that's because what happens when industries are nationalised and owned by the government, there's substantial costs involved. And often government doesn't prioritise the investment infrastructure. Alone nationalising water will cost £90 billion. On top of that, there's ongoing costs for maintenance, and that's money that can't be spent on hospitals, it's money that can't be spent on schools, and it can't be spent on defence. And as a result, in the end, you end up with poorer quality services, and with services that aren't responsive to consumers, and really an awful situation with this infrastructure being dilapidated.
Yeah, Matthew, I want to bring in Ellen at this point, because you're therefore saying that actually the money would be better spent, and private firms can spend that money. Ellen, can they? Because if we look at the cases of this week, they've just not been doing that. Underinvestment was the reason for the Southern Water problem.
Well, yeah, clearly not. We've seen the evidence again and again that private companies don't make the necessary investment. The 160 billion figure that Matthew quoted in the water industry, all of that has been covered by customers' bills, which were massively hiked when it was privatised and are now 40% higher in real terms than they were before privatisation. All of the investment could have been covered by customers' bills. Water is a profitable industry. It is not rocket science to reinvest that profit and make the necessary investment. In Scotland, they invest more per capita than English water companies do. And bills are £40 lower, roughly. So, it's just not true that private companies will make the necessary investment. The investment they do make is because it is legally required of them to do. For example, the EU regulations for cleaning up our rivers, which was why they made investment in the early 90s. They don't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're not paying for it out of their own pocket, and I don't see why a publicly owned company couldn't make the same investment, reinvest the profit and make a better service.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew, when we look at that, though, private ownership, the process of franchises, essentially what we're creating are monopolies. These rail companies, for example, have huge monopolies on those lines. Even though we say they don't, they're the only firm that's able to operate. That means there's no incentive to cut prices or make the system any better, make the service any better.
Look, I completely agree, and that's why for quite a number of years, the Adam Smith Institute has actually advocated for open access on trains, which means rather than this existing system
Matthew, we know that open access doesn't work. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you've got one train operating on one line. You can't put more trains on that line. Virgin Trains, in this case, have the monopoly.
You can actually run different trains at different times. There are open access lines in the UK where prices for passengers are lower and where customer satisfaction is much higher. It's not impossible to have different operators having allocated different times on the train line competing for customers. I do completely agree that the monopoly franchise system has failed and needs to end, and hopefully the government does do that as part of the Williams Well review that's going on at the moment, and it does facilitate more competition, because I think you're completely right.
Yeah.
The purpose of privatisation is not just to get things out of government hands, it's to enable competition so that there's better passenger outcomes, so there's high-quality services and innovation.
In most public services, there is a natural monopoly, you're absolutely right, and open access on the rail would just increase the fragmentation, which is the cause of the problems that we're having. It would mean that there are more ticket choices, more confusion, more chaos, less cooperation between the different parts of the railway. It's just going in completely the wrong direction, and it's not the solution.
Ellen, Matthew, we could continue this conversation all day. I'm really sorry we're out of time, but it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on all of that and what happens next. We'll continue this, and I'm sure we'll talk about this again, but I'll have more for you after 7. I'll see you very soon.
Thanks, Ben.